Wonderful. Okay, so just to start off, today's chabura will be brief, I hope, and more breadth than depth. Rabbi Reese already covered the depth, so you'll forgive me. I won't try to recover it. I'll try to go past it, maybe different directions. Coming out of Yom Hatzmada, everyone is very happy, Baruch Hashem, with the success of Medinat Yisrael in many ways. And we've discussed already this year that there have been some times when it wasn't so pashut in Eretz Yisrael, between 78 and 88, with inflation, runaway inflation, and the like. To review some of those topics of Hatzmada chov, of currency linkage, I think is very kedai. And you'll pardon me in advance for being a little bit of a historian, but I think it plays very much into our topic as well. The basic mekor of the Gemara Bava about how money doesn't change, peirot do. We've spoken about. We have a whole set of halachot of se'ah b'sa'ah and pisika al haperos. People don't buy money; they buy commodities. If prices change, it's not the money that changed; it's the commodities that changed and their value. Chachamim were not gozer on the sale of money. It wasn't shachiach so much. They were told everything on peros, and that's where they were gozer. The Gemara Bava about matbea hayotze ve'otasha, how we have sugyas of hosifu, of nifsala hamatbea, the mahloket Rav and Shemuel. If you have derech lemeshan, fine. We spoke about all that in other times, not to go through it again now. But what I found to be particularly important, once we cover that information, the Poskim, starting from the 1500s and on, felt these reverberations of economic crises that found their way into the Sheilot Teshuvot for many dorot ad hayom hazeh, and sometimes I found it to be very confusing to go through. So I'll share my confusion with you, and hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. Many Jewish people after Girush Sfarad lived in a city called Salonika in Greece, one of the golden communities, golden age from 1500s to 1700s of tremendous economic proliferation and Torah proliferation. Many Gedolei Yisrael, who are quoted in the Pitchei Teshuvah, found their homes in Salonika in the different communities, the Sfaradi community, the Italiani community, the Romanio community, the Ashkenazi community, and the like. All not Ashkenazi community, there were no Ashkenazim allowed. But the other communities that were in Salonika were very successful, and their Sefarim, Baruch Hashem, are on our shelves. The Av Beit Din in the 1500s was the Maharshdam. Shmuel de Madna, he was the Av Beit Din of Salonika. He is one of the most famous, and perhaps you could equate him with the Beit Yosef himself, Poskim of his door, and one of the Rabbanim of one of the Kehilos in Salonika was a Rav Shlomo Cohen, Maharshach, as he is called. And there isn't that much that a normal person would know about Rav Shlomo Cohen, other than the fact that you go on his Wikipedia page, if you don't want to read the whole introduction in the Zichronar edition of his Sefer, you go on the Wikipedia page and you see a notable Piskei Halacha is his grand mahloket between him and the Maharshdam. A simple shul rabbi in Salonika fought it out at great length with the Av Beis Din, and Rabbi Reese presented it one way. I would want to frame it a little bit differently, so here goes. The issue at hand was that in those communities in Salonika, in Kushta, in Mitzrayim, all around the world, especially in the Ottoman Empire, there were major currency issues that were the currencies of the age. There were Ottoman sultanis and other Ottoman coins, but then there were other local currencies that when those areas were conquered by the Ottoman Empire, were kept in circulation. The Ottoman Empire was not makpida on the flow of these currencies, and sometimes they would be, though. Sometimes they would adjust. If they wanted the Livanium to be more expensive, then the Grushim is groshin, it's a European coin that made its way into, and you talk about how Chacham Avadia used to say that you'd go to these slichot events at 1 in the morning in a stadium, and there would be somebody there singing Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, V'Kippah Shelo, Lo Le'afilu Grush. His kippah was smaller than a grush. A grush is a European coin. It made its way into Israeli society through the Ottoman Empire. And they would want to adjust these things. So if somebody would borrow money, we know that if you borrow money, you have to give back money. It doesn't matter how much the payroll change, you have to give back the money that you borrow. But what if somebody borrows money, he borrows 100 grush, and it's worth a certain number of levanim, and he's supposed to pay back in levanim. And then the emperor comes and decides that the value of those grushim has to go down from whatever, from 50 levanim per grush to 40 levanim per grush. And if he's going to return 40 levanim, the malva is going to lose out. Do you go by shad halva'ah and say at the time it was worth 50 levanim and therefore I have to pay back by that rate? Or do you go by shad pira'on and that you have to, it's dynamic and it changes over time and you have to give that back? The Maharshach starts off his teshuvah. He only has 3 of them. The Maharshach starts off his teshuvah saying, I'm sorry, it pains me so much, but it's our responsibility to keep the Torah. And the Torah says, you give what you back what you got. It doesn't matter that there are different currencies around. It doesn't matter that it's been adjusted. It's the malva's loss, it's the malva's loss. And it's all payra at the end of the day. There's different currencies. Some of them have the status of payra, some of the status of tiva. Some it'll be se'ar sorim. Sorry, in se'achitim. It changes, that's fine. You pay what you got. That's it. And he keeps on writing over and over again. You pay what you got. That's the halacha. The Maharshdam starts off his teshuvah saying there is a rabbi in my community who said this thing. He's completely wrong. And he thinks that anyone who doesn't agree with him is not a bar hora. I think I've already quoted that line. I forgot. Of course, you have to go by shab hira'on. Even though the Gemara Bava Kama sounds like that's not true. You have to pay back the original amount. It doesn't make sense that somebody should borrow money and lose it. They should lend money and get back less than he gave away. It's a misvar that we make an umdana that you gave $100 expecting to get back $100. This mahloket between Maharshdam and Maharshach is echoed throughout history. Whether it be the Lechem Rav, who was a Talmud of the Maharshdam, who disagreed with his Rebbe, whether it be the grandson of the Maharshdam, Shmuel Chayun, who disagreed with his grandfather. The Knesset HaGedolah beautifully summarizes all the names, the Al-Sheikh and the Radbaz and Rav Eliyahu ben Chaim, the first Rav Eliyahu ben Chaim, and all the other great Gedolim of their door who took a view, had an opinion on this matter. He did a very nice job of summarizing everything. Unfortunately, it's me'od confusing because the tziyunim of the Al-Sheikh in the 1500s and the 1600s are not the tziyunim of the Al-Sheikh today. And you can convert them to the ones of today. But if it was written b'ta'ut 500 years ago, the ta'ut is just converted to another ta'ut 500 years later. And the Al-Sheikh here is not the Al-Sheikh there. And so the Radbaz, of course, is a whole mess. Everyone has a shita. Erech Lechem is soter himself. So some poskim say this way for the Erech Lechem. Other poskim say the other way for the Erech Lechem. By the way, the words She'ar Pira'on and Shad Halva'a are not muvanim me'elehem. So half the time somebody will say Shad Pira'on, but he really means Shad Halva'a, and vice versa. So we could play the list game. I don't think it helps us in any way because one person's list will have what he wants on it. The other person's list will have the same posting on the other list. Perhaps that's normal today as well, but I found that to be extremely confusing. I would go through a teshuvah, and maybe it's because of my own inaptitude, which is totally possible. But I also found it to be very unhelpful, given all these mistakes that are there. So we're not going to go through the list, but I think that my thesis statement is that to say the Maharshdam was the greatest posek in the world, and the Chazon Ish quotes him, and the Nesivos quotes him, and therefore and the Minchas Yitzchak quotes him, is a misframing of the mahloket. Given how, we'll get through how I believe everyone lines up the mahloket, whether it be the list it be 10, 10, 3, or 12, 8, 3, it doesn't really matter how you break it up, it always comes out that nobody actually holds like the Maharshdam. I believe that is empirical. I can show it to you, and I'm going to try to say it over. But that's the thesis statement. Nobody actually holds like the Maharshdam. And part 2 is that it doesn't really matter. Because Bezman Zemani is so different, it really is not important to mention this mahloket whatsoever in our day. I will say that I have no vendetta against the Maharshdam, except for a different teshuvah, and Even HaEzer Reish Lamed Vav, which I believe we're all on the same page about, Rabbi Risa and I, that he destroyed the Institute of Kihuna Bazman Hazeh by saying that all Kohani Chazaka Bazman Hazeh, Kohani Safik Bazman Hazeh. Nobody, I think we all agree that we don't like that Maharshdam. Otherwise, all the Maharshdams are great. Just that this one we don't hold like. That's all. This one's also great. That one is not great. This one I think is great. I just don't think that most hold like, and I want to show that. If you look, the Ginat V'Radim, of Avram ben Mordechai Halevi, an often disregarded community in Jewish history these days is Mitzrayim. There was great Gedolim who lived in Mitzrayim for many centuries, not just the Radbaz and Erech Lechem, but also after them as well. There was Rav Mordechai Halevi, the Darchei Noam. He was a Maharshdam guy, but he wasn't as aduk to it, but he was a Maharshdam guy. And he wasn't so sure either. He concluded the Safek and the Pshara, whatever, we'll get there. His son, Rav Avram Halevi, was the Ginat V'Radim. The Ginat V'Radim has a 40-page teshuvah, where he starts off saying that the Maharshdam is wrong. Then he says the Maharshdam is right. Ultimately, he is not so sure either, but he very much likes the Maharshdam. And these are his words. Umatzati shechibru alav re'av, uveit aviv, minisharim kalu me'arayot gaveru, v'kotle beit hamidrash hirtiu lekolam, ve'eten el libi l'radet lem'arachot hamilchama, makom anshei chayil hachazakim, livchon ma'aseh tokvam ugvuratam, avina la'acharitam. This is no simple, everyone holds like this issue. This is the entire Olam HaTorah, half versus the other half. That was the Ginat V'Radim's thing before he launches his attack against the Maharshach. He goes through the Maharshach and says, I disagree with everything, and I'm not going to bother with everybody else, because if you read what I read about the Maharshach, you'll realize why everybody else also has problems along the same lines. So we're not going to get into that, he says. So you might think, okay, the Ginat V'Radim is a big hitter. His father, the Darchei Noam, is too. The Darchei Noam was more interested. The Ginat V'Radim, his Lashonot are still not as vadai. And then his Talmud, the Perach Shoshan, Ginat V'Radim, Shoshanim, right? The Perach Shoshan is the Talmud of the Ginat V'Radim, of Yeshua Zayin Shababo Dayan, one of those four named people. Rav Yeshua Zayin, the Mahari Zayin, is the Chida Kotzim, is the Talmud of the Maharsh of the Ginat V'Radim, who helped publish the Sefer Ginat V'Radim with his own father-in-law, whose name escapes me right now. And he wrote many teshuvot to his Rebbe, the Ginat V'Radim, that are published in Ginat V'Radim. And then there is a whole Sefer on the Sefer Ginat V'Radim that he wrote after his Rebbe's death. And in it he goes in the other direction. He says, Mikol makom minidon zeh shelo nifsal hamatbeya v'lo nishtana mima shehaya rak shehuzal o shehukar v'zeh yesh mahloket gedola ben haposekim aracha likrat maracha v'alenu l'shabeach la'tayar gadol ma'or hagola. We have to thank so much for someone who did all the work for us. Hameir einei chachamim b'halacha harei hu harav haKnesset hagedola, who collected all the shitos for us. Shevi kol chachmei Yisrael v'kaf moznaim ha'gaot latur. So if one wants to play the game of numbers, you can, looking in the Knesset hagedola. The Perach Shoshan himself is very much in favor of the Maharshach. FYI, the Perach Shoshan has a 700-page manuscript sefer called Sha'arei Yeshu'ah, quoted by the Chida throughout Shulchan Aruch and the Birkei Yosef. I needed to look something up in Hilchos Ribbis recently about the Bnei Ha'ir making takanos. So we spoke about this earlier, I think Kusamech Vav, wherever it was. And there's Kusamech Chet, Kusamech Tet. There's a Perach, there's a Sha'arei Yeshu'ah quoted by the Chida. We don't have it in print. It was never printed. We have a manuscript. If you look, I think in JTS, wherever the manuscript is there, it's this gigantic book, 900 folios. The Chida had it, and he quotes it Kaseder throughout. The Perach Shoshan is not a small hitter. It's someone the Chida thought to be extremely important. So in my opinion, the presentations, they're all there. You could go look, they're all the names and whatever, how much everyone likes the Maharshdam or the Maharshach and what their maskanos are. Just because you like the Maharshdam doesn't mean your maskana is like him. The best presentation in terms of the halacha, in my opinion, is that of Maharam ibn Chaviv. Moshe ibn Chaviv was the second to be shown the Tzion. First, I think, was the Magen, his father-in-law. He was a Rosh Hashiva and a Lamdin. He gave Shiurim, Yom Teruah, Kapot Timarim, Tosefet Yom Kippurim, while he was the Rishon LeTzion. And before he became the Rishon LeTzion, I think at a very tender age, in his 20s or something like that, he was living in Turkey. And he wrote a little sefer we have on the shelf called the Get Pashut. Next year, Bezat Hashem, we learn the Get Pashut, and we go through Hilchot Gitin. The Knesset HaGedolah is the great Me'asef Kol HaMachanot. The Get Pashut is the Machriya. and he's very much the Kool-Aid in Hilchot Gitin, and who comes to his Hachraot, and he thinks that ultimately there's no Ribit Ketzutza. It's always going to be Ribit Derabanan in one way or another, Avak Ribit. And if you claim that one currency is Pera to the other one, so we have the rules of Sa'a B'Sa'a, Yatsa Hashar, didn't change that often, or Yeshlo. And now you want to be Motzi Mammon from me? When I can say it's Sa'a B'Sa'a, when I owe you money, I'll pay you the less money. I'll pay you. If I owed you $100, and now the value of these coins went up and you want more money, or it went down, and then you want more of these coins to make up for it, I won't pay you that money. I have a kimli. You can't be motzi on my kimli. The halacha follows the maharshach anyway. The money's not changing, and therefore, Marabi and Chavi's hachra was to follow the maharshach b'vtorat vaday. Those who subscribed to the Maharshdam saw the mahloket in front of them, and Rubam, if not Kulam, felt that despite the fact that we believe the Maharshdam is correct, we opt in favor of Pishara. We wanted to make sure that next year we're going to learn Gittin, the year afterwards we're going to learn Hilchot Dayanim, the entire first semester will be Chaburos and Hilchot Pishara. I'm sure we'll cover a little bit of it now. We should always aim for a Pishara. And there were different shitot, different minhagim, different takanot in different communities. In Kushta and Salonika, for example, to do a Pishara of 30-70, to do a Pishara of 50-50, whenever it came to these matters. The Perach Shoshan quotes the Marash Alevi, who said that Kvara Shamanu Bedorot She'avru, Ha'elokim Ha'adirim, Ha'rabanim Ha'geonim, Eitanei Olam, Rabotino Kedoshim, Asher Ba'aretz HaChaim Zal, Hiskimu B'haskama Lefasher Bein HaSocharim, Be'inyanim Kayotze V'Ka'ele, וגם עתה בזמננו זה בסלוניקי הסכימו הרבנים לבקש הדרך הנכון והוא הפשרה עד כאן. That's what they did. Parashoshan also went for the pishara. Many went for the pishara. So some people, even Bazman, as they say, look, pshara, everything should be pshara, right? Except in Revulik Shir, everyone does pshara. Everyone goes for pshara, except for that famous story of no pshara. The famous story, right? No pshara, yeah. So other than the famous story, everyone wants the pshara. So the Chikrei Lev, who was a later Rishon LeZion, or Yosef Chazan, he lived in Kushta. He was a Rishon LeZion from Kushta, I think also, whatever, maybe he moved to Yerushalayim. Sorry, he moved to Yerushalayim. He was the grandfather of Chaim Falaji. The Chikrei Lev says that he doesn't believe that this Pshara is binding. This Pshara Takana is binding. In some communities, the minhag was that we always do Pshara. But in another community, you could just opt to follow the Maharsha. The need to do Pshara is not something that is required, that the Dayanim can force upon the Baalei Din as a Bikoach HaTakana. If they want Din, then the Din could be like the Maharshach. All of that, the issue of general halva'ot, the issue of currency changing gabe one another, the Maharshdam versus the Maharshach, that's the old school issues. The old issues, well written out, whatever. Back when money was hard coins, metal coins that had value, the sugiyas of Hosifu and Nifsal HaMatbeya were all about when there was hard money that was valuable. Then we have the introduction of banknotes and bills and the whole mahloket between the Khatam Sofer and Mordechai Banet and the Har Hamor about whether or not paper money has the status of tiva or not and how to handle that. Of course, the mahloket between the Khatam Sofer and the Chazon Ish. How do you define money? Rabbi Leich spoke about a year ago in discussing, is it because the Melech was gozer or because people were mekabel on themselves? Some people, I don't know why, they think it's the same thing. I think Rabbi Leich made it very clear that they're two different things, the Khatam Sofer and the Chazon Ish. Rabbi Batsri presents it as the Chazon Ish's biur of the Khatam Sofer. I don't understand why. In Dinei Mamanot, in the first volume, Hilchot Halva'ah, he has an essay in Shar Yud Aleph about Ribit. He discusses at the end the Khatam Sofer and the explanation, the biur of the Chazon Ish of the Khatam Sofer. To me, it sounds like apples as oranges. It doesn't make any sense, but okay. But regardless of all of that, that was for backed money that was backed by value. Bazeman Hazeh, there is no backing, and we had the whole introduction of the changed dollar and the led to hyperinflation of the shekel. And on top of all of that, we had in Eretz Yisrael alone the British Eretz Yisrael lira, the Israeli lira, and when the Medina became a Medina, the old shekel, the new shekel, and all the whole economic history monetary history of those shekalim. We spoke about that already. And at that time, how people thought that maybe the American dollar is tiva in Eretz Yisrael and the shekalim are pera, as opposed to tiva, because no one really believed in the shekel anymore, and Rav Moshe and Rav Chacham and Sion, everyone. But nowadays we know that doesn't really apply as much, except for some closet gedolim who think that ad hayom hazeh, that the American dollar is tiva in Eretz Yisrael, because 88% of the global economy is in dollars, and Eretz Yisrael is no less. But other than those, perhaps we would call them side poskim, those side opinions, most would assume that nowadays the shekel is the tiva and the American dollar is the pera. Now, that's the general raid that everyone always says over. The thing I thought was interesting was, how do you do ketubot? Rabbi Reese touched this as well, but I think there's more to add here as well. In the world of ketubot and world of batei din in Eretz Yisrael, where everything is so hyper-focused on Even HaEzer because they're not allowed to deal with Choshen Mishpat as much, the whole world of batei din is focused in all the padarim and all the Shurat Hadin articles and as other places as well, is that how do you handle ketubot that were in old lirot or in old shekalim, and now we have everything in new shekalim? How do you handle that? And that also leads to great confusion, because just because this article says that the American dollar is tiva doesn't mean it is bazman hazeh, because it was written in the 80s, and if you don't read the date on the article, if it doesn't say it on the article, then you remain confused about what this posik says bazman hazeh. Rav Dichavsky used to be an American dollar tiva person, now he's besafik, for example. But he doesn't tell you that until you read the footnotes of the article in Lev Shomei Lishlomo, that this was written in the 80s, and I'm just printing it today in the 2020s. But maybe it's different, maybe it's not. Now, Bizmanam, there was great mahloket based on a mahloket between the Taz and the Derisha about whether or not we are ever matzmid the ketubah by coinage. And it seems like in the early 1900s there was a mahloket between the Chazon Ish and Ratzi Pesach Frank, whether or not we would adjust the ketubah to meet the change of currencies and the linkage. Now, there is a further mahloket whether or not the old shekel is nimshach into the new shekel. Is the new shekel a hamshach of the old shekel, or are there two different currencies? One, and that it's not one replacing the other necessarily, because there was a period, I wasn't there obviously, there was a period where they both existed at the same time. You could use both of them at the same time. It wasn't an immediate crossover, there was some sort of in-between time as well, and that had an afkamina according to some. Now, one of the best parts of ketubot is that there is no rebate. Now, money never changed hands. It's more of just a matter of kinas and Piron HaChov, and not as much a rebate problem. So some therefore say the Maharshdam should agree. Because every time Maharshdam's whole point was a svara. I lent you money, expecting to get back, my whole principle. Here there was never a loan. So maybe the Maharshdam should agree that we don't adjust the value. If the ketubah was worth 100, it remains worth 100, it doesn't change. Whereas by Hahalva, the Maharshdam said if it went up, then you pay less. If it went down, you pay more. Right? It would be different here. Now, are other poskim who are concerned with Yediyah, Haskama, Umdina? Person gets married, he signs off on a ketubah, he's maskim, he gives the ketubah to his wife, and it says he'll pay 1,000,000 shekalim, 1,000,000 yishanot, and he knows that there's a thing called inflation. She knows there's a thing called inflation. How much is each one really expecting these things to change? Is he expecting to have to pay much more money? And he's masking to that? Is she maskima to the fact that the value of the ketubah can go down? All these things, the poskim of today, and the past several decades, have discussed and raised as issues. And some want to point out there's an issue of kinas, right? And nehene, so you should pay, in general chovos as well. And in the world of copy pasting piskei din, when one dayan writes a psak and then the other one sees it and he copies and pastes it into his own psak, everyone quotes Chacham Avadia and Rav Elyashiv as saying we should do Hatzmada for the ketubah. If the ketubah was worth 1,000,000 liras, which are worth nothing today, we should adjust it to raise it up to something equivalent in shekalim. Baziman hazeh. So Rav Mordechai Toledano, the son-in-law of Chacham Avadia, who was Av Beit Din Mamonot in Yerushalayim, and I forgot who asked Rav Elyashiv. I wrote it down somewhere here, but whatever. They write down that Rav Avadia and Rav Elyashiv were pro Hatzmada during their tenure in the Beit Din Hagadol. Now, Rav Elyashiv died in 2012, I think. 2012. He was not in the Beit Din Hagadol for several decades prior. So it doesn't really matter that we can copy and paste and print these words in 2020, 2025. It doesn't, you can't say that Rabbi Elyashiv felt, even in the 2000s, we should still do Hatzmada. In the 80s, 70s, when he was in the Beit Din HaGadol, fine. But it's not the same thing today. And Chacham Ovadia never explained, Rabbi Elyashiv never explained what the reasoning was. And Ad Hayom Hazeh, if you read the Piskei Din, Rav Lehrer and Rav Lavi and everybody else, they all write how there is Kaya Mahloket ben Batei Hadin. There is no standard. Every Beit Din does whatever it wants. And I'll give you an example. Rav Uri Lavi, who my first exposure to the Lehohora was in 2014, when Rabbi Bleich gave a 3-part series against the Get Mitzvat, which was made Rav Uri Lavi infamous. Rav Uri Lavi was the Abeit in Tzvat, and you had the famous get with the guy on the motorcycle in Tzvat back in the day. So Rav Uri Lavi has a very bad rap for that psak. He has a 3-volume set called Ateret Devora. His mother's name is Devora. He wrote a set of a sefer called Ateret Devora, and today he's an Abeit in Yerushalayim. Well, I happened to have been, when I first got married, I went to Eretz Yisrael for a couple of weeks, and my wife and I, we stayed at her great uncle's apartment with her great uncle there. They had an extra room. We stayed there for 2 weeks. It was the beginning of Elul, and I was trying to wake up for Selichot, but these Tunisians down the street in Emek Refaim, where we were staying, they prayed at 6 in the morning Selichot, and I was just newlywed. I was touring Eretz Yisrael with my wife. I'm not going to sleep early enough to wake up for 6 a.m. Selichot. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. So one of those mornings when I was just like, not doing teshuvah in bed and sleeping in, I had an issue. I texted Rabbi Shai Shechter about a certain issue I was dealing with in the community from afar, some divorce case, whatever. And he called me and said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, fine, whatever, fine." And I'm like, "What?" He's calling me. It's 8 a.m. in Eretz Yisrael. It's 1 in the morning in America. What is Rabbi Shai Shechter doing calling me now? This doesn't make any sense. So it's 8 a.m. I got up, I responded to him, whatever, and we moved on. And then I got on a bus, we walked to the kotel, to daven Shachrit. I get to the kotel, 8:30 a.m. Rabbi Shai Shechter is sitting right in front of me. He was in Eretz Yisrael also, he was on a little bit, he had an issue, he was on vacation after dealing with some crisis in the community. So he asked me, "What are you doing today?" "No, vacation, whatever." He said, "I'm going to Rav Asher Weiss's kolo to meet Rav Ovadia's grandson. You want to come?" Okay. Can't say no to that. So we got on a bus to Ramot, and at one point Shai says, "Okay, your wife will be okay?" She was with me the whole time. So I said, "Yeah, what's going to happen? We're on a bus." "Okay, great." So the bus doors open, Shai gets off, I got off, my wife stayed on the bus, and the bus kept going. We had no cell phone. I had the money, she didn't have the money. and Shai's like, "Your wife will be okay?" I was like in a daze, like, "I guess so, whatever, okay, fine." So we made our way into Rav Asher's kolo. I met Rav Ovadia Yosef Toledano. Rav Asher's wife had just died, I think, a year before, so he was unwell and he was home the whole time, he wasn't around. But we made our way I met Rav Ovadia Toledano, our esteemed on the shelf over there, and we schmoozed for a while, and in walks Rav Zev Litka. Rav Zev Litka is also a Dayan. He's responsible for, I think, Din online a little bit. And he wrote the book about DNA and halacha, the mitochondrial DNA. He's the one who gathered all the articles about mitochondrial DNA and halacha. So he walks in with a box of this book about mitochondrial DNA that just came out. He hands one to Rav Toledano. And he starts talking about the Get Mitzvat. It's 2017. The Get Mitzvah happened 3 years ago. And in the Rabbanut, they're still tummeling about what we should do to punish Rav Uri Lavi for what he did. And he starts telling me and Shai all these things. We want Rav Shechter to come and talk about it and whatever. We're like, in America, this parsha is over already. Why are you guys still fighting about it? And then he had a great throwaway line that Rav Uri Lavi, despite this one psak, is better than any other 3 dayanim in any harkev in the Medina. Just because he made one mistake doesn't mean we should throw him out with everything else. So I started learning Ateret Devora over the years. And I'm very happy I did, because he has a great piece about this issue, the Maharshdam versus the Maharshach. Rav Uri Lavi thought that this whole thing is irrelevant by Zaman Hazeh. Back then, the Groshin were Pera, not Tiva. We're talking about Tiva. About Shikalim, our Tiva. We're working with Tiva, the Chikrei Lev. We don't have to deal with anything else. Alternatively, the Maharshdam was about unexpected turbulence in value. If things change very sharply, fine. But if it's just natural change, that's not government, that happens from time to time, then that's not a big deal. Bezman is that is shachiach, and it's not government regulated. So it's the Mahloket was not in that camp. And he does a very good job of summarizing the opinions. He says how there are some Poskim who are full-blown Maharshach people. There are some Poskim who are Safek people. There are some people who are Pshara, Mikoach Takana B'nei Ha'ir. But there's nobody who is a straight Maharshdam Posik at all. And the Maaseh, because there is no minhag, can do whatever we want. We don't have to do a Hatzmada, so we won't. Happens to be Rav Yoezer Ariel, and some others did think to do that, but we'll leave them alone. That's in Chelik Bet of Ater Devora. A couple years ago, out came Chelik Gimel of Ater Devora, and he took it back. He said that he thinks that in some circumstances, it is kedai to do a Hatzmada. If the value of the ketubah would be diminished so much by adjusting the value that it wouldn't be worth my time zuz, it wouldn't be enough to get this woman on her feet, or whatever it is, then we would do Hatzmada in that case. And he has some other example also, whatever it was. He says it happens to be, Dina de Malchuta is very helpful here, especially because even though the government doesn't regulate the value of the shekel anymore, it's all about public opinion, but the government works with the public opinion, so that becomes part of the what should we call it, Dina de Malchuta. Now, that was Rav Uri Lavi. I think to his credit, he was moda that he took it back. And on the other side, even though he is pro Hatzmada sometimes, there are those who say that we should do something. Rav Djavaheri in Leiv Shomei Lishlomo, it's probably an older article published somewhere else, Rav Djavaheri writes that the Gedolei Hador should get together and write a line in the Ketubot that will cover the Hatzmada. We should adjust, we should make some sort of takana, that whatever the halacha should be reflected in the lashon of the Ketubah, and therefore we won't have a problem anymore. Now, Rav Tzvi ben Yaakov and Rav Djavaheri also add in Mivatel Kiso Shel Chavero. Mivatel Kiso Shel Chavero, to have to pay for it, is a great mahloket if it would apply to a halva'a. But by a ketubah, by a chov, or by anything that's just a keren, that I gave you something and your responsibility is to be shomer and the value of my keren, there could be a reason there, in addition to all these discussions we had about delayed payments and the penalties, there could be room there to add in extra recuperation for the lost value through Hatzmada. And then Rav Tzvi ben Yaakov has cases of people who didn't pay their debts on time, didn't pay their wages on time, and whether or not we should do Hatzmada there. And it touches on what we talked about in Siman Kuf Samech, the Mahloket between Rav Eliezer Mitul and the Beit Yosef, but whether or not we should what should we call it? What was the issue? The Rav Eliezer Mitul in Siman Kuf Samech. I forgot already.
You pay for delayed service.
There we go. Yeah, good, great. Paying for delayed service, good. Now, in general, about loans with Hatzmada, and just to close, in general, loans with explicit Hatzmada, whether we should be matzmid in general, lechatchila on the dollar, everyone says is asur to do so. That would be rebate. Just because the payrolls change in value doesn't mean you should change either how much you're paying. Bris Yehuda and the Malveh Hashem, etc. Everybody says that way. So make a heter iska. Don't just loan on indices. Make a heter iska and then loan on indices if you want. Alternatively, there are all sorts of tachsisim, etgarim that poskim present of maybe if you want to lend al pi the dollar, you lend him shkalim and tell him to go buy dollars and then pay you back in dollars, but he just pays you back in shkalim worth $1, and all sorts of these like little techniques that people offer in order to do that. Bidi Eved, let's say you didn't write anything about Hatzmada in the shtar, and now you want to. If you really hold like the Maharshach, you don't need to. But what if a person wants to go and pay more? The Loveh wants to pay more to the Malveh. So Rav Moshe Levi in Malveh Hashem thinks that for a Sfaradi it would be Asur, because he believes that you have to minhag lefasher, and it would be Asur for the Sfaradi to take it, you have to follow that minhag. Whereas for an Ashkenazi, that's not bound by the minhag lefasher, would be better. I think most people would not tell you there's minhag lefasher altogether, but okay, fine. Some thought you could rely on the Maharshdam for other chovot, not for halva. Rav Moshe Paniri is a great Nida rabbi in Eretz Yisrael. He's an expert in many tchumin of Torah, but he's well known for his Beis Torah of Nida, in the world of Nida. Rav Moshe Paniri has a sefer Ribi L'or HaHalacha, where he is a student of Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul, and he thought that Chacham Ben Zion Abba Shaul said, and Rabbi Yashiv did as well, that you can rely on the Maharshdam for other chovot, just not for a halva. Whether you should be matzvin on the dollar or on other things, other indices, that would be a different story. Now, there's lots to talk about in terms of paying back in one currency, borrowing one currency. I'm not getting into it for now. Ultimately, Rabbi Batsri says, like Rav Dichavsky, should write in the shitar what you want. What are the terms of the agreement? What are the terms of the loan, of the chov, whatever it is. And that way all the expectations are laid out. We can avoid disagreements and disputes. It's nice to have a minhag. The Maharshdam was also pro minhag. It's nice to have a minhag of how to handle these things when prices fluctuate. Because if in the days of the Maharshdam, when the prices fluctuated so little, so seldom, they thought it was kedai to have a minhag lefasher, but zmannenu, where the prices change every second, it's more kedai to have a minhag lefasher. And ultimately, that would hopefully keep us with some more shalom in the world. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen. Amen. Thank you, everybody. I hope that was not stepping on everybody's toes too much. I did call him in advance and go over it with him, and he was masking. So, thesis statement was, it's great mahloket, it's irrelevant. Thank you.
Next week.